Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Achieve Extended Office Hours. We wanted to be able to provide this opportunity for our school systems to bring any of their questions as they are finalizing their plans. So we are grateful to you for making the time to do this call today. Just a quick reminder, throughout the call, we'll be collecting all questions that are submitted through the chat, and we're going to respond to as many as possible at the conclusion of this brief presentation. And we will document every question submitted. If we don't get to it today, we will certainly be able to reach out. And additionally, we're also going to share the file where all of the questions and responses are going to be documented. In addition to not only the questions from today, all of the questions and responses that were provided in previous office hours will also be shared and made available to you today. We encourage you to submit all of your questions through the Grants Help Desk email so that we can make sure to capture and codify all of those in our FAQ. We're going to go over just a few very brief and high level information pieces about these funds. Some of this will be just a reminder and some of it may be new information. So with our ESSER 2 funds, there are similarities between ESSER 2 and ESSER 1, but there are a few distinctions. With ESSER 2, there were new allowable costs, such as facility repairs, air quality improvements, and efforts to measure and address learning loss for students, particularly high need students. Similar to ESSER 2, for ESSER 3, LEAs are not required to provide equitable services as they are with ESSER 1, and everything allowable under ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 is still allowable, but there are a few distinctions, including LEA and SEA state reservations for evidence-based activities and interventions to respond to students' social and emotional and academic needs. LEAs must seek public comment on their plans for returning to in-person instruction and post those on their website. And then there's a new maintenance of equity requirement. So to address the impact of COVID-19, Congress provided financial support for districts and schools through the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. This came in 3 separate programs. First, in March, the CARES Act included $13 billion. The main purpose of these funds was to ensure students and educators had the device and connectivity needed for remote learning. In December 2020, an additional $54 billion for ESSER 2 was allocated through the CARES Act. And these funds were provided to really help school systems measure and address learning loss. And of course, most recently, in March 2021, the American Rescue Plan authorized another $122 billion for ESSER 3. And these funds are really focused on reopening school doors and keeping them open so students can return to in-person learning. To support the development and implementation of plans, Congress allocated all of this money for school systems to make sure they are providing quality instruction and continuous learning for their students. Districts have the flexibility to use ESSER funds on any activity authorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, including assessments, instructional materials, software, hardware, PD, connectivity, teacher pay, and summer school activity. We'll get more into some of that later. And obviously, we know that many of you have questions, and we'll be able to address those specifically. Just quickly, the allocation and methodology breakdown. The allocation for ESSER is utilizing the Title I percentage breakdown for the awards to our LEAs. So the allocation or the amount that goes to our LEAs is 90% of our total award, which is just over $2.3 billion. Of that amount, 20% must be used on evidence-based interventions. So this includes things like high dosage tutoring, high quality, robust summer learning experiences, including enrichment, comprehensive after-school opportunities, or extended school year programs. To help school systems track and report on this 20% requirement, a separate section has been created in the Achieve application. And we'll share more about that in just a moment, but also be able to address any questions that you have. Just looking at the allocations and how we are giving those out into school systems. So these are coming out in 2 action periods. And this is to make sure that we are meeting federal requirements for awarding the funds to our LEAs. Secondly, this is to support strategic and coordinated response efforts through 2024. Third, this is to help ensure school systems are spending down their first money first. And then lastly, to make sure that school systems meet that 20% requirement of ESSER 3. So a breakout of how those funds will be distributed is seen below in this table. And I will say just quickly, we will be sharing this deck out and posting it on the website at the end of this call. So next, we're going to briefly talk about priorities-based strategic planning. ESSER funding can be leveraged for a wide range of activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. Additionally, ESSER funds does not include a supplement, not supplant provision, providing additional flexibility in budgeting to meet the needs of addressing the impact of the COVID pandemic. In developing local plans, remember, ESSER funding is non-recurring emergency aid, one-time funding. So accordingly, consider how this funding might interact with your other federal, state, and local funding, and the role of those enhanced funding flexibilities to promote sustainable use. We ask that you please continue to prioritize equity in your planning and consider how such investments can accelerate opportunities, particularly for those students with the greatest needs, families and students living in deep poverty, students with disabilities, English learners, migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and children in foster care. So as you can see here, each ESSER 1, 2, and 3 have a 1-year difference in their period of availability. So in thinking about multi-year plans, you can stretch these dollars out and make sure that continuous services and supports are provided to our students and our support for our educators through and across multiple years. As many of you know, to support school systems with planning and budgeting for these funds, the departments developed the Achieve guidance. And within this guidance, there are new updated and previously released high impact initiatives, which are aligned to each priority and focus area. Through planning for the utilization of these funds, school systems are able to commit to priorities from the Believe to Achieve Priorities plan, identify key stakeholders who should be a part of the Achieve planning team, and use the 3 key resources while planning. These 3 resources are the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 allowabilities from ED, the Achieve planning guidance document, and the EIC codes. There are additional resources that the department has developed in preparation for helping school systems plan, and all of that can be found in the Achieve planning guidance document. Just quickly going through the timeline, as you can see, April 30th, which many of you know, we are asking school systems to submit their budgets. This is to make sure that we can have approved budgets by June 1st, enabling school systems to begin drawing down those funds. So to support those school systems using this money in a strategic priorities-based manner, this guidance document that was released, along with an evidence-based resource, will help school systems ensure quality and comprehensive planning. Because we are releasing the funds in multiple action periods, but we've also provided the estimated full amounts to our school systems. Some questions have been sent in around what are we actually planning for versus what are we budgeting in EGMS. So to clarify, school systems should be developing full, comprehensive, multi-year plans right now. And they can look at those full estimated allocation amounts that have been provided. And we can find that link and put that in the chat or make sure that that's available to you, so that school systems are able to see and plan comprehensively over multiple years. But in terms of what is getting submitted in the budget for April 30th, that is the amount that has been loaded into EGMS, which is 50% of ESSER 2 and 20% of ESSER 3 formula funds. Any remaining funds from FY21, which is June 30th, will automatically carry forward in EGMS to FY22 on July 1st. As the school systems develop and revise their plans, you'll be able to make those budget amendments and revisions throughout the life of the grant. So once additional funds are allocated and loaded into EGMS, school systems would amend their budgets to include those amounts. And again, don't forget, if you do have questions, please submit those in the chat. We have a team actively working on building a response, which we'll get to our Q&A in just a moment. Now I'm going to invite Burnell Cook, our Executive Director of Federal Support and Grantee Relations, to talk us through two important aspects of expenses that's really important for our school systems to remember, and that's the pre-approval process and construction expenses.
All right, good afternoon. Thanks, Danielle. So as Danielle mentioned, we do have a pre-approval process for the Achieve application. We know many school systems, they're considering various ways to improve their facilities, to increase mitigation and prevention efforts. Some of the equipment and capital expenditures require pre-approval. As such, we've created a new process, and many of you have already started submitting those requests to us, to submit those pre-approval requests to us. It's a single form, and we actually have it linked here on this slide. This can also be found in the Federal Support and Grantee Relations Library. And I want to draw your attention to the type of cost too that's captured on this slide in terms of what will require pre-approval. So you'll see general equipment purchases like vans, buses, land purchases, building purchases, improvement to general equipment and land and our buildings. And so we're talking about capital expenditures here. And we noticed that some of the requests that we received, they didn't warrant pre-approval. They really should have just been submitted through the normal budgeting process, and we would approve them there. So please make a note on the types of expenditures that should be included in the pre-approval process. Now, next slide. We want to bring your attention to one of the main areas there that we are getting requests on, and this involves construction costs. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. All right. Now, with the construction costs, as many of you probably already know, this type of cost, as spelled out in there, it requires you to go through the pre-approval process. And we wanted to establish some framework here for all of you to just look at certain areas in terms of what our review will entail when you submit those pre-approval forms for construction expenses. So this guidance here that we received, we have to determine whether this cost meets the reasonable and necessary requirements for the grant. And so we have 4 bullets here that we will be considering. We'd ask you do the same as well, even though some of you have submitted construction costs to us already, but we'll be following up with you to get you to address these questions here. But those that have costs to be submitted, we would like for you to consider these bullets. The first one is, how does the cost compare to other options? For example, if you are asking to build brick and mortar buildings and things of that nature, have you looked at leasing a facility or leasing portable buildings, things of that nature? Another area would be, what are some actual pricing protocols that you've looked at in determining if you're abiding by market rates, material costs, bidding protocols? Make sure you've done those things. Now, this third bullet here, and you may say it's a no-brainer, but we are really having some issues with attaching, how does the cost truly align to a COVID-related response? You know, if you tell us that you want to replace the roof on your buildings because they're just leaking and the buildings need new roofs, well, we're having trouble connecting that to how is that a response to COVID, which we know that many of those expenses probably incurred before the COVID era. So make sure there's a clear connection in your request to how is this, as Danielle said, in preparation for, prevention of, or response to COVID. And then lastly, will the cost be incurred during the budget period of the funds? For example, can the school complete this project before September 20 of 23 if you're using ESSER 2 funds, and September 2024 if you're planning on using ESSER 3 funds or ARP funds? As you know, some construction projects can go on for 2 or 3 years. So you need to take that into consideration as you are submitting those requests. So we thought it was very important that we share just the framework and how we are viewing the pre-approval process around construction. And many of you should be receiving responses back from us, whether it's approved or additional information is needed this week. And we are definitely going through those submissions expeditiously. All right, so I'm not sure if I'm turning it back over to Danielle or Miss Katie.
Hi, Burnell. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Very helpful information. So what you'll see here are just some additional planning resources. Again, we will make this deck available to you at the end of the day. We'll make sure that link is on the website. Now we are going to advance to the next slide, and we will be transitioning now to our Q&A section portion of the call. So thank you so much for those of you who started submitting your questions in the chat. Our team has actively been working on providing some of those responses. And in just a moment, we're going to share our screen with live updates on with those questions and responses as they come in. Again, we'll do our very best to answer all questions during this call, but we'll post the link to the file on the website updated with information from today's call. There's a question that can't be answered on the call today. Please provide your email address when you send that question in the chat, or send the question to ldoe.grantshelpdesk@la.gov. So now I will share my screen and we will begin to go through some of these questions. So I will turn it over to Katie Perry.
Thank you, Danielle. So we are going through some of the questions that are coming in the chat and providing you with responses. So as you see, as of right now, we have 2 questions that we have within the spreadsheet as well as responses. So I'm just going to voice these over, but again, they are there for you to see. This is also the document, just so that you know, that will be shared on the website. As Danielle mentioned, we will be placing categories next to these following the call. The format of the file that will be posted to the website is actually an Excel file, but again, the format as well as the information will be the same. So jumping right in, the first question we have is, have ESSER 2 funds been given out? And the response is yes. The initial 50% of ESSER 2 allocations is available in EGMS and in the Achieve application for you to begin budgeting. The next question we have is, although ESSER 2 Part 2 fund became available in January of 2022, can they be used for expenses August through December 2021? And the response is yes, the pre-award costs are allowable for expenses incurred from March 13th, 2020. So give us one more second. We're going to continue to pull those questions and those responses. So we'll be back in a moment. All right, and as you can see, we have one more question as well as response for you. So the question is the submission date? If we could just stop for a moment, I think I'm hearing some background noise. If everyone can just make sure that they are muted. Thank you. So the question is the submission date April 30th or May 3rd? So we did let everyone know in the last office hours call that the soft deadline is May 3rd for the submission of the Achieve application. That deadline, of course, is for the department to be able to keep up our end of the deal in terms of being able to approve those applications within the month of May, and then make sure that your school system can draw down the funds beginning June 1st. So we reiterated this again on the last office hours call, but in the event that your school system needs more time beyond that soft deadline of May 3rd, you can take that time. However, we cannot, commit to ensuring that the department has reviewed your system's application if we do not receive it by May 3rd in order for you to, again, get those funds within the EGMS system by June 1st. I know we had some other questions that we were responding to, so I'm going to transition back again. Give us one moment. We'll be back with more responses. All right, so we have a bunch of questions rolling in, but we have one question with another response for you. The question is, if a project is submitted by the district and approved by the Department of Ed via the pre-approval process, will there be an opportunity once the approval is granted to amend, modify, delete the project at a later date? If so, please advise. And the response is, school systems need to note that the pre-approval is for what was submitted to the agency for that specific cost, and that any deviations should be resubmitted for approval. Okay, we're going to again just
There is no sound.
Okay, hopefully y'all can hear me now. So the question was, can ESSER 3 funds be used to pay fees and uniform costs for enrichment and extracurricular activities for migrant students that otherwise could not be afforded, that could not afford to participate? And the response is the school system would need to justify how this expenditure is related to COVID. This would definitely be an allowable migrant program expenditure. And the second question there is the grant states that pre-award costs are allowable for expenses incurred from March 13th of 2020. Please give some explanation on how districts will account for these transactions since it crosses fiscal years. And the response is, since this is a multi-year application, expenditure dates that are within the availability period of the funding are allowable. And we had some more responses that we were getting to based on questions received in the chat. So I'll be back in just a moment. Bunch of responses for you based on other questions we've received. So in line 9, you can see that is the question we are on at this point. Can the ESSER 2 funds be used to reimburse the general fund for the cost of Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, days that our district had to pay employees for? And the response is ESSER 2 funds can be used to fill any budget gaps regarding activities that have a clear connection of responding to COVID, and this expenditure appears to meet that criteria. So scrolling down a little bit on this response page so everyone can see in line 10, question is there a limit on cost per pupil that can be spent on snacks? And I know we had 2 questions relevant to this similar situation here. So can those funds be spent on snacks through this grant for summer programs? And the response is, while there is not necessarily a limit on expenses other than the 20% requirement for ESSER 3, as with all uses of ESSER 1, ESSER 2, or ESSER 3 funds, a proposed use of funds must be to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. And in line 11, another question, can ESSER 3 funds be used to pay for PD stipends associated with learning recovery loss with the Tier 1 curriculum? And the response is, as with all uses of ESSER 1, 2, or 3 funds, a proposed use of funds must be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. So again, the school system would have to show the need for and the connection to those things to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19. We have some more questions that are still coming in and others that we are still addressing. So we will be back again in just a minute. Okay, beginning again on line 11, because we do have some additional information in relation to the question asked here. Can ESSER 3 funds be used to pay for PD stipends associated with learning recovery loss with Tier 1 curriculum? And the response, the updated response is, again, like we mentioned before, as with all uses of ESSER 1, 2, or 3 funds, a proposed use of funds must be to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. But we have new information, which is addressing the learning loss among students is an allowable cost. If the PD is related to the evidence-based intervention, it could be funded with the 20%. However, all other PD would have to be funded with other CARES Act funding. So jumping to line 12, when budgeting for summer learning for evidence-based social emotional learning, can all funding related items to ensure that program is running correctly and effectively be placed in ESSER 3, personnel, instructional and non-instructional supplies, transportation, etc. And so the response here is all instructional related costs, including professional development activities, can be funded with ESSER 3 evidence-based funding. All other associated costs should either be funded through ESSER 2 or the remaining 80% of ESSER 3 funding. In line 13, scrolling up a little bit on this page so folks can see the actual responses. So the question is the pre-approval request form submitted prior to submission of the grant application, or is it submitted within the application? And the response here is the pre-approval request is not part of the application. These requests can be submitted prior to submission of the application. If an approval is received prior to the submission of the application, the school system should upload the approval on the budget detail page. And the rest of the response there is if a submitted request has not yet been approved, please indicate in the expenditure description that the request is pending approval by LDOE. And we mentioned that on our last office hours call as well. So if you have submitted for pre-approval and you have not received yet the approval from our department, please just put a note in the expenditure description that the request is pending approval by LDOE. Okay, we have some more responses, so we're going to jump back to the questions and come back on, and again, just a moment. All right, we again have 3 more questions that we have worked through. So line 14, can ESSER 3 funds be used to support additional staff to provide job embedded PD to ensure teachers are providing appropriate strategies to address academic deficiencies as a result of learning loss? And the response here is, as with all uses of ESSER 1, 2, or 3 funds, a proposed use of funds must be to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. And addressing learning loss among students is an allowable cost. Line 15, would the following be allowable with ESSER 2? Recruitment, retention stipends to all staff that worked in person in the district during the 2020-2021 school year, $1,200 for certificated and $600 for support staff. And the response is ESSER funds generally will not be used for stipends, merit pay, or similar expenditures unless they're related to disruptions, closures resulting from COVID-19. School systems can use the ESSER funds to provide stipends for faculty and staff if those are related to preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19 or coronavirus. And examples are provided in our FAQ document, which is also linked in the chat for folks on this call. That FAQ document is also linked on the Louisiana Believes website within the Pandemic Relief Library. Line 16, question is, if we're planning for a capital expense in ESSER 2 Part 2, can we submit a pre-approval form now or should we wait? And the response is yes, you can submit a pre-approval form now for that capital expense request. So I do see that we have some more questions that have come through the chat. We'll be back in. All right, we have had a few questions regarding AFR and the key codes for those. So those responses will be provided to the individuals who submitted them at a different time, and the responses will also be posted in our FAQ. We do have to collaborate with another department that is not a part of this call at this time. So again, we will be getting you those responses for those of you who asked that question and simply making the responses available through our FAQ document. Line 17, a response we do have to a question. ESSER 2 funds are quickly being budgeted. Can you give us an estimated release date for the remaining ESSER 3 funds? This is in response to your answer to item 12 in your spreadsheet. We are looking for funding for transportation and food expenses. And so at this point, I know it was on the timeline as well within the slide deck, but the agency has not yet determined a date. We are having internal discussions regarding the release of the additional ESSER 3 funds, and we'll be providing updates sometime in the next month to our school systems. Line 18, another question, when can we expect the 80% of ESSER 3 if we have to pay for the support portion of our summer program with it? And again, we are still having internal discussions regarding that release date, and we'll be providing those updates within the next month. And then the next question here, some pre-approvals are not necessary. What examples would be necessary for the pre-approvals to be submitted to the department? And the response is the examples provided on the slide for the pre-approval process should provide some examples. And if you have other questions and other examples you'd like us to review, you can submit those through the help desk email. But typically it's capital expenditures that are over $5,000. And we have LinkedIn at the top. We're going to link it again for you, the actual slide deck for this particular presentation. And we will be posting this slide deck, if it's not already posted, on the Louisiana Believes website within the Pandemic Relief Library. I'm going to jump right now to the other screen and just make sure we've captured all the questions, and I'll provide an update in just a moment. All right, we do have a few more questions. We also received a comment just that everyone would benefit from the AFR information. And again, we will provide that to everyone. What we typically do if we are unable to provide a response on the actual call, we will make sure that in capturing the individual who provided that question to us through the chat, once they provide us with their email address, we will directly reach out to them, but we will also, of course, again, make the response and question available through the FAQ as well as through these Excel files that will ultimately be posted on our Louisiana Believes site. So jumping to the next question at this point, line 20, where you see it bolded, can ESSER funds be sub-awarded through an interagency agreement and budgeted in Object 500? And the response here is we would actually need some more specific examples in order to provide you with an appropriate response. So if there are specific examples that you can provide us, again, you can email us through the help desk and we can make sure that we provide you with those responses, but it's difficult for us to respond here with limited information. Line 21, will this question and answer document be in the library? Again, yes, we will post this workbook. It will not be in the form of a Google Sheet. It will be in Excel, but we will post the responses in the exact format as you see it on our pandemic relief website. They will be posted for today's extended office hours calls, as well as the previous office hours calls that we've had. And you see the third column here, column C, which is labeled categories. So we will be placing categories next to each of these questions and responses. For instance, if it is a question relevant to ESSER 3 allowabilities or funds, we'll put ESSER 3 in that category so that it helps our school systems to look at those categories and quickly see where some of the questions potentially for topics and categories they have questions about themselves may be lying within the actual spreadsheet. Line 22, can ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds be used to contract with external accounting firms to process grant requests, or is this to be paid for with indirect cost? And so the response here is this expenditure appears to be an indirect cost expenditure. So again, it appears to be, but if you have some follow-up questions on that, please feel free to email the help desk and we can make sure that we get this to you. I'm seeing a lot of folks in the chat just putting their email in for the AFR answer. So again, we will make sure that if you submitted that question, we will email you with the response for the AFR once we have the opportunity to collaborate with the other department, but we will also post the AFR in this actual spreadsheet, the AFR responses, and then in the category, you will see AFR as the category so that you can easily access that information. Again, I'm going to jump back over because I did see some other questions, for instance, about literacy coaches in that initiative. So I know we have some responses that are being provided. So give me one moment. We'll update everyone momentarily. All right, so two more questions and responses for you. On line 23, your literacy coach initiative is tied to our plan for addressing learning loss. Can the balance of salaries be funded through ESSER 3? And the response is which portion of the ESSER 3 funds, the 20% loaded or the 80% to be loaded? And it will definitely be an allowable expense for the 80% that the department is still determining for release of those funds. 24, will the office hours scheduled for tomorrow, and I think this was meant the Achieve office hours for Friday of this week maybe, will it be the same discussions and presentation as today? So of course, typically, we have, if there's any new information that comes up between now and then, we're providing that within the slide decks. We do not see any new information that will be coming down the pipe at this point. So it will most likely be the same presentation slides on the Friday Achieve call, but the questions, of course, that are being asked by participants may be different. So a lot of our responses and this portion of the presentation are driven by those questions. And we also just want to clarify, so the other extended office hours call, so it will be, again, same information that we've covered in the basic slides at the initial portion of this presentation, but we will of course take the questions, and that will be adjusted based on what questions are asked from our school system. So that portion of it will look differently. What we will continue to do on the office hours call for the extended office hours and for the other office hours on Friday of this week is we will continue to have this spreadsheet with the responses for school systems to see that are participating on the call, and then also to download from our website, like we mentioned before, so that you can view these responses and the questions after the call as well. All right, we do have about 7 more minutes left. We have 2 more questions that came in that we want to provide you responses to. So in line 25, the Literacy Coach Initiative was for the 20% of ESSER 3, and the response is yes, school systems must use at least 20% of their share to provide evidence-based interventions to meet the social, emotional, and academic needs of their students and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on students and families. Line 26, where do we identify the evidence-based strategy for each item on the grant? And so the response is this information would need to be uploaded with the link provided on the consolidated budget detail page. We do have a question that I'm seeing right now in the chat. Will this webinar be available in the Achieve library? And yes, it will be, as is with any of the other office hours slide decks. All of this will be available. See one other question coming in, so we're going to look at that one. If you have final questions, please make sure you're submitting those through the chat. We do have, again, about 6 more minutes left of the extended office hours meeting for today, so we want to make sure that we can address as many of your questions as we can today before the call ends. All right, so there's one more question that we have after this one that I'm about to go over, but in line 27. The question is EIC code EBASL is evidence-based activities, academic, summer learning and enrichment, not social emotional learning. Just want to get clarification. That answer is the same. It is all related to summer learning to address learning loss. So there is a specific EIC code that is for evidence-based activities for social, emotional, and mental health, and that code is EBS. And then there is a code EBASL, which is specified as the code for evidence-based activities, academics, summer learning, and enrichment. So there are two different EIC codes, and those are within the Achieve guidance document. Okay, and as a reminder, while we are finishing up responses to some of the final questions that we have at this point, we just want to remind everyone that is still on the call that the slide deck, as well as the responses and questions that you are seeing on your screen here today, as well as the previous questions on the tabs that you see at the bottom of our screen for April 16th and April 23rd from those Achieve office hours, not the extended off hours, but just the regular office hours. All of that information will be posted within the Pandemic Relief Library on the Louisiana Relief site today. So you will have access to all of that information. So give me just one moment. I'm going to transition back over and we'll finish responding to some of the final questions that we have before we close out in 1 minute. Okay, so we are at time. We do have two more questions that we'll just follow up with the individuals that asked those questions after the call today. But the final question is in regards to evidence-based activities, do we have to update the strategies if it is one of the activities listed on the EIC, expense EIC sheet, example, summer learning and enrichment? And so the response is yes, all evidence-based research information must be provided for all instructional activities funded with evidence-based 20% funding. The only time we said it did not have to be provided was if it was an initiative from the department released through the Achieve guidance document, or if it was within one of the clearinghouses. And all of this is on the evidence-based document that we released in the last office hours call. We thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to the extended office hours tomorrow. Please join us for additional questions. Again, all of this information will be posted on the website. Thank you and have a great evening.